Associate Professor of Law, Dr. Sam Amadi, who is the Director, Abuja School of Social and Political Thought and a RISE analyst, is here to look at the takeaways from the G20 summit and the lessons Nigeria can learn and maybe make some projections about the AU-EU summit in Angola, where the Vice President is already in to attend the seventh meeting. Very warm welcome to Newsnight.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me.
You just wondered that with the absence of, the police of the world, America, from the G20, you had thought that, it would be colorless and the rest. But a lot has really happened there with other world leaders from the UK and the rest, attending. How would you aggregate the entire this year's G20 in Joburg?
Well, coming the first time in Africa and coming to South Africa, perhaps another, maybe a case that South Africa in optics and what matters is perhaps still leading the continent. We Nigerians believe we are the leader of Africa. Virtue of size, population, and the historic role we have played in Africa, but South Africa somehow upstages us in critical issues. The World Cup came to South Africa, now G20 first time South Africa, and they did put up a show. Again, the US being upset is really some kind of stain on the company. The US, if you look at the issues discussed, they will require a lot of US support in terms of pulling along with the agreements, even though some of them are non-binding, especially the G20 critical mineral framework. But then, many important countries are there, and international relations, the World Bank, we saw WTO, Konjiwala, they all play key roles. So, in a sense, a success. America is not there. China kind of downgraded their attendance to senior officers, similar with Russia. But I think, in a sense, this didn't whittle down the significance of the event happening in Africa and make it, the South African president and his team tried their best to, make it be what a show comparable to any G20 elsewhere.
And some of the benefits for Nigeria, because President Tinubu, through his representative, the vice president, had called for, equitable and fair trade balance, between the south and the north.
Common team. I think it's under Yar'Adua. I was lucky to be part of the team that went to the G20 in Rome when I was in the foreign affairs advisor. But look, the teams are the same. For more than a decade now or two, the world has been, obsessed about fair trade. There was a major report I heard that Professor Stiglitz was supposed to submit around equitable, inclusive equitable growth. So the idea, Nigeria pushes it, of course, all the major countries from the south push the notion of fair trade, which means if you look at the issue around critical minerals, which was one of the things discussed, developing countries, the G20 emphasized the need to continue to explore those minerals. And again, they are seen as pathways for Africa, developing countries, economies to emerge. Nigeria is one of the countries with the perhaps best deposit of minerals. We know that Niger
after
State,
Congo, after DRC.
Exactly, one of the best. Niger State, different states, Nasarawa here, they have very critical minerals. But the question then is, how do you really transition from, exploration, export to value addition? And that's what the team around economic growth through industrialization and the idea of industrial policy. Now, the problem with Africans in this is that, after this talk, the rules are set, the strategical leverage you need to break through is not there. So it's not the G20 and these pronouncements that will unlock for you that strategy. If you look at what Asia did and how Asia emerged through a developmental state, they're able to strategically engage the system, in fact, game the system. I mean, China, for example, was a latecomer to WTO. China came with a lot of demand. And so one of the things with Africa, and that's also casts a shadow on the upcoming EU-AU. many of these summits, with good intention, with good framework, did not open the door. Because you get into, the door is open when the home government, the continental governments are well organized, they have the strategic plan, and they optimize around their competitive advantage, and then kind of bullish and play like they are mad, and win concessions not by what come out of summit, but their own capacity to outmaneuver, to game the system.
Isn't that where the AFTA comes in, the African Free Trade Drone Continental Agreement?
Well, but then if you look at AFTA, it's still underdeveloped in terms of the critical linkages. Even the basic framework. If you look at studies around trade, of course, it came up the issue about volume of trade, intertrade. You look at infrastructure. You look at regulations, convergence. So the problem here is that there are a lot of framework for Africa to take advantage of, but again, nobody mentions it. The fact that most of African governments are struggling with legitimacy, are even struggling with what scholars would call infrastructural power, the power to drill down policies, protect the policy against special interests and capture. The states in Africa seem not to exist in many places, and if they exist weak, weakened, and weakening. So yes, you can talk about these policies or talk about AFTA and all that. Critical point is, do you have a bureaucratic state that has the capacity to articulate these programs, protect these programs, push them, and not have special interests disarray you? So the weakness of the political economy aspect of it is actually stronger than what happens in that,
situation. And the weakness seems to, loom large in West Africa, in the various regions, and the totality of the continent without a common currency to trade with, even within the Africans. In Europe, there's a common currency.
The common currency crisis is a problem of portability and also of exchange of value. So it's a problem. So if you have a common currency, it helps. But look, Europe evolved into the Europe. The integration was structured, coherent, and evolutionary. The problem is that at the basic levels, we're not picking the pieces. So yes, we had conversations around the common currency. We are polarized. The English and French countries, no agreement on what to do. That's perhaps rested, moving on. I think the key thing is this. Maybe Africa, we should do sub-regional. So West Africa, there seems to be some economic and cultural contiguity in the sub-region. So West Africa, East Africa, Southern Africa. Now, if they're able to optimize their convergences and the interdependencies they have, and structure, West Africa should be a common market, actually, because the size, Nigeria dominates, but cultural contiguity is very high. So the critical issue here is you don't seem to have political stability over a durable period of time to allow for structured policy development. If you look at Europe, it took a long time. The European scholars creating European idea of the European citizenship, common citizenship, okay, that gave impetus to the convergence economically. So there was a normative convergence, where Europeans see themselves as Europeans. Structural barriers are removed, infrastructure, free flow of ideas, free flow of goods, and free flow of people, and also ease of movement. Services. So all this came together, and then they developed structured regulatory convergence. So the EU competition law, everything standardized. Here, I think we should be more realistic and start doing the basic things right first. And then when we get this, and again, that's the problem, when we get too carried away by summits, international summits, and everything is framed around Africa, we go home with a sense that perhaps we are solving our problem by attending, and look, we put up a good show. But once we leave that place, if you look at the domestic review of Nigerian economic structure and institutions, you see a disarray, you see lack of convergence and coherence. And so the question then is, at the end of the day, fortune favors the bold and the organized. So at the end of the day, those frameworks may be good, they may be helpful, but if you're not organized at home, and that's why for me, I would focus more on domestic coherence. Then you push yourself to leverage on international. That's how Asia evolved. So I think African leaders are becoming too carried away by commitment to international framework and not really thinking hard about even their basic constitution, even their basic laws. They are not sensible, they are not even coherent, they are not even implementable. So at a point, we might come back in the next 30 years, we're still talking about making trade fair for Africa, and talking about inclusive growth, talking about providing financing for climate change mitigation. These problems recycled for decades because Africa has not had a major period, and again, West Africa, as you mentioned, is becoming the worst. Fragility is very high. Illegitimacy
very high indeed.
Conflict very high.
Yes, indeed.
And then it requires a more structured and home-made and home-focused solution.
Yeah, Sam, we've got to go. I wish we got the whole day to discuss this. Associate Professor of Law, Dr. Sam Amadi, Director, Abuja School of Social and Political Thought, and Arise Analyst. Thanks so very much for coming to talk on this. Okay.